Welcome back to Let the Chips Fly podcast. And in this episode, we talk about the 2026 May newsletter called Chips from the Charlotte Woodcarvers.
And we are really getting into the mechanics, the art, and the incredibly dedicated people behind this thriving analog community.
Yeah, because if you're already plugged into the carving world, you know that lazy stereotype people have of us.
Oh, definitely. The whole solitary older guy sitting on a quiet porch, just slowly whittling a stick while watching the sunset.
Right, exactly. But you and I both know the reality is so much louder. It's way more collaborative and infinitely more complex than that.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to unpack all of that by looking at their massive 43rd Annual Showcase wrap-up. I mean, what emerges from these pages is honestly a masterclass in how a local guild doesn't just survive today, but actively pulls in regional talent.
Yeah, and mentors the next generation, too. It's wild what happens when an ancient, subtractive art form collides with over 800 competitors, 10-foot slivers of basswood, and, strangely enough, ChatGPT.
Right, the AI cameo. We'll get to that. But first, just the scale of this thing.
It's staggering. You don't get over 800 handcrafted pieces in a single room by accident.
No, you really don't.
When I looked at the raw numbers that Showcase Chair Keith Jones provided, my immediate assumption was, well, the host club must be doing all the heavy lifting to pad those stats.
I mean, that's a fair assumption. And they did show up.
They really did. The Charlotte Woodcarvers brought 48 individual carvers who contributed 309 entries. So, yeah, home turf definitely provides that foundational volume.
It provides the baseline for sure. But what is actually shocking to me is the second largest demographic in that data.
Oh, right.
Because it wasn't the Piedmont Woodcarvers or the Triad Woodcarvers, even though both of those groups had really strong showings.
Yeah, they did.
The second largest contingent was 34 carvers, who explicitly listed no club affiliation.
Wait, 34 completely independent carvers?
Yep. And those independents brought in 202 separate entries. I know, right? It reveals something really crucial about the gravity of this specific showcase. It acts as this beacon for independent artists who normally just work in total isolation.
But they feel compelled to pack up their really delicate, fragile artwork and actually travel to participate in this specific room.
Exactly. And that independent turnout totally validates the travel miles logged by the other organized groups. You have contingents coming from Atlanta, the Mountain Tradition Woodcarvers, and even the Genesee Valley Woodcarvers.
You just do not get that kind of geographic spread unless the event is operating at a top-tier level.
You really don't. And President Steve Stillitano actually addresses this in his opening letter.
Oh, I loved his quote. He writes, quote, "Now, I know I am biased, but I think we put on one heck of a showcase this year."
Which is completely fair.
Yeah.
I mean, when you successfully corral 128 individual carvers and 804 total pieces without a complete logistical meltdown.
You've earned the right to take a victory lap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, the logistics of managing 804 unique items, like registering them, tracking, judging categories, organizing floor space, getting them back safely, that's a massive data management puzzle.
Oh, it's a nightmare. And ironically, for an event that is entirely dedicated to celebrating, a 19th century tactile craft, they actually leaned on 21st century technology.
Yeah, the poem.
The poem. Right in the middle of the showcase wrap-up is this poem praising the 804 entries and the vendors. And the author is explicitly credited as ChatGPT.
I had to read that twice when I saw it.
Same. The juxtaposition is just brilliant. You have this huge room full of people using steel hand tools to manipulate tree bark, and they use an artificial intelligence language model to write a poem about it.
It's hilarious, but it proves this community isn't walled off from the modern world, They have a great sense of humor about their place in it.
They really do. But, okay, moving from the digital oddities down to the actual sawdust on the floor, the physical feats performed at this showcase are wild.
Oh, the competition?
Yeah, let's talk about the longest sliver contest.
This is so intense.
Right. So as I understand the mechanics here, they take a 10-foot basswood board, and the entrants use a knife to try and carve the longest continuous sliver without the wood snapping.
That's right.
Wait, so they just take a knife and see who can peel off the longest continuous strip? That sounds like trying to peel an apple in one single unbroken ribbon, but the apple is 10 feet long and fights back if your wrist twitches even a millimeter.
That is the perfect analogy for the physical tension involved. It's agonizing. And The choice of basswood is highly intentional here, too.
How so?
Well, basswood has a very fine, even grain structure. So unlike oak, which has heavy open pores,
Right, oak is super bumpy.
yeah, or pine, which has alternating hard and soft growth rings that would just catch a blade immediately, basswood allows a razor-sharp edge to glide uniformly.
Got it. And Dave Dion won half the entry fees this year for mastering this.
Yeah, Dave killed it. And it really highlights a totally different side of the craft. I
Yeah.
mean, a finished sculpture is about artistic vision, right? But the sliver contest is about the pure physics of carving.
Just the raw mechanics.
Exactly. The blade acts as a wedge, parting the cellular structure to wood.
Yeah.
So maintaining the exact microscopic angle of that wedge over a 10-foot distance, that is a supreme test of human muscle memory.
Because if you angle the blade, what, half a degree too deep?
The sliver gets too thick, requires too much force, and you lose control.
And if you go half a degree too shallow?
The sliver thins out and snaps.
Man, so it strips the entire art form down to its most brutal, fundamental mechanic. It's just man, steel, and grain with zero room for error.
Exactly. But while the veterans are sweating over a 10-foot plank, the club is simultaneously running a masterclass and lowering the barrier to entry for newbies.
Yes. The kids' table. They set up a carvers-in-training table manned by Rich DeFranco, and it was specifically focused on soap carving.
Which is such a brilliant pedagogical tool.
Because hardwoods are just too tough for kids.
Right. Hardwoods require really sharp tools and significant hand strength, which immediately disqualifies young children. But soap is soft and yielding.
So they can use something safe.
Yeah, it allows a child to use a rounded, safe tool like a popsicle stick or a plastic knife to grasp the core concept of subtractive sculpture. They learn that you cannot put material back once it's removed.
Which forces them to think spatially.
Exactly. And Rich DeFranco running that station means several kids left with an actual understanding of three-dimensional form. He's planting the seed for the people who will be running the 70th Annual Showcase decades from now.
You absolutely cannot sustain a community without that kind of on-ramp. And, you know, to support all these carvers, from the kids with Slurp to Dave Dion with his 10-foot basswood, you need a massive supply chain.
Oh, the vendor ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe Davis wrote the vendor wrap-up, and the sheer scale of the retail side is staggering. They had 26 vendors overflowing into the front foyer of the Whirl building.
Which Joe notes hasn't happened in over 5 years.
Right, and these aren't just like local hardware stores setting up a folding table.
Not at all. The vendors traveled from 12 different states, from New York to Wisconsin, all the way down to Florida.
Wow.
And what they're supplying really represents the deep specialization of the craft. The newsletter mentions they were selling pyrography tools and rough-outs, among a bunch of other things.
Wait, for those less familiar with the production side, can you explain what a rough-out actually is?
Sure, yeah. A rough-out is a massive time saver. It's basically a block of wood that has been pre-machined to the rough, blocky shape of the final carving, like a bear or a cowboy.
Okay.
It removes the tedious, exhausting first 60% of stock removal, which allows the carver to focus entirely on the detailing and the actual art.
That makes total sense. And what about the pyrography tools?
Pyrography tools are highly calibrated heated pens used to burn designs into the wood. So this allows artists to alter the surface chemically, adding deep shadows or texturing fur, or creating sharp contrast without physically changing the silhouette of the carving.
Having access to that kind of specialized gear in person, where you can actually feel the balance of a knife or test a gouge before buying it, that's invaluable.
Huge advantage.
Oh, and I have to mention, Joe Davis made sure to include a very specific, slightly defensive shout-out in his wrap-up.
Oh, the food truck.
Yes. The food vendor, Dusk to Dawn, was accidentally left out of the official showcase photo album.
A tragedy.
Truly. So Joe deliberately wrote them into the newsletter, praising their good food at reasonable prices, just to make sure they got their due credit. Justice for Dusk to Dawn.
Justice for Dusk to Dawn. But it's those small, very human details that remind you this isn't some corporate expo, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a neighborhood operation where people actually notice if the lunch crew gets slighted.
Mm.
It really speaks to the relational nature of the event.
Absolutely. Now, all of these components, the vendors, the specialized tools, the competitive tension, they ultimately serve one singular purpose: creating physical narrative art. And the photographs of the winning pieces in the newsletter are spectacular. But one piece in particular redefines what most people expect from wood sculpture.
Oh, You're talking about Andrew.
The guy with the bucket. I could not stop looking at this
That's
piece.
so good.
It really is. It depicts a man dressed in overalls, and he has literal wooden wings strapped to his arms with heavy leather belts.
And the bucket.
Right. He has a metal bucket turned upside down over his head, acting like a makeshift crash helmet. And he's captured mid-stride, attempting to launch himself off a hill to fly.
It's wildly dynamic.
But the true genius is the plaque at the base of the carving. It claims to be a true story from 1936. I have to read the text verbatim.
Please do.
Okay, it says, in 1936, Andrew Moore decided he could fly like a bird. He and some of his friends made a pair of wings. Andrew picked a steep hill to fly from.
Setting the scene.
Right. Andrew ran down the hill as fast as he could, flapping his wings, but he just could not get into the air. He fell and rolled to the bottom of the hill where he hit a barbed wire fence and stopped. Yeah, it gets better. Andrew's son, Hudson, was 12 years old. Hudson ran to his daddy and asked if he was okay. Andrew said, yes, I think so.
And here comes the punchline.
Yes. Then Hudson said, Pa, I know what went wrong. You just didn't flap hard enough.
It is a phenomenal piece of three-dimensional storytelling.
It's so funny.
And what this piece accomplishes is incredibly difficult in static media.
Yeah.
Comedic timing.
Yeah, because classical sculpture is usually reserved for the majestic or the deeply serious.
Exactly. Andrew demonstrates that wood can capture pure absurdity. The rigid posture of the figure, the ridiculous visual of the bucket helmet, and that deadpan punchline on the plaque. They work together to immortalize a family legend.
It proves that wood carving doesn't have to be stoic to be masterful. It's literally a sitcom, cold open, carved out of a tree trunk.
That's a great way to put it.
But what blew my mind was looking at the photo of Andrew right next to the other showcase winners.
Oh, the contrast is jarring.
Totally. Right beside this comedic failure of a flying man is a carving of a highly realistic owl perched on a stump. The texturing of the feathers and the sheer predatory intensity of the eyes make it look like taxidermy.
And just below that is a Native American bust.
Right. The artist carved these incredibly deep, weathered lines into the face, and the weight of the expression conveys this profound dignity. It is genuinely difficult to comprehend that the buckethead guy and the majestic owl were pulled out of the same raw material using the exact same set of hand tools.
Well, that is the core revelation of the medium. Wood is not the art. Wood is merely the vehicle.
Right.
It's as versatile as oil paint or wet clay. The grain can be manipulated to express deep sorrow, quiet dignity, or, slapstick comedy, depending entirely on the intent of the hands holding the gouge.
Which poses a fascinating question for you, the listener. Think about your own life for a second. If you were handed a block of wood and the master-level skills to carve it, what specific moment would you capture?
Yeah, would you capture a funny family failure, like the time someone dropped the Thanksgiving turkey?
Or would you try to capture a deeply serious portrait of someone you respect? The medium can handle whatever emotional weight you throw at it.
You're a really great thought experiment. But of course, acquiring those master-level skills requires an infrastructure.
True.
I mean, an 800-piece show doesn't spontaneously assemble itself, and carvers don't learn how to texture owl feathers in a vacuum. The organizational engine of the Charlotte Woodcarvers is what actually makes the art possible.
Right, the engine. And that brings me to something in the newsletter that actually made me stop and check my math.
The dues.
Yes. So I looked at their onboarding pipeline. They had 8 visitors sign up as new members right on the showcase floor.
Which is a great conversion rate.
And then I looked at the financial requirements. The dues are $30 for the entire 2026 to 2027 fiscal year. $30.
Yep.
The newsletter reminds members to pay their dues to Don Rayerson, the treasurer, or Christy Gaskell in membership. And in exchange for that $30, members get access to carve at the Cathcart Center every single Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m.
10 hours of open carving time.
In a dedicated studio facility every week for a year. Wait, $30 for a whole year. That math doesn't make any sense for paying rent on a facility or keeping the lights on. How on earth is the club subsidizing this massive amount of studio time without going bankrupt?
Well, they subsidize it with human capital.
Ah.
Yeah, the club operates with essentially zero overhead because of what President Steve Stilitano calls utility players.
The volunteers.
Exactly. These are the volunteers who absorb all the labor costs of running the organization. Steve specifically highlights 2 individuals, Rich DeFranco and Jay Haynes.
We already know Rich was running the soap carving table.
Right, but Steve notes he also handled registration, setup, takedown, and even physically helped pack up a vendor's booth.
Wow.
And Jay Haynes was running seminars, hauling heavy tables across the floor, and at the last minute stepped in to run the raffle table.
So when you have members willing to do the gritty, unglamorous work for free, you don't have to charge $300 a year for membership.
Precisely.
That actually explains why they can afford such an extensive educational curriculum. Because they aren't paying for labor, they can focus entirely on mentorship.
Yeah, and the newsletter outlines their spring and summer class list starting on April 28th.
And it is a masterfully designed progression for those 8 new members who just joined. I mean, Don Ryerson is teaching how to carve comfort birds.
Bob Warner is running a class on knife sharpening.
Rich DeFranco is teaching the Moravian Star.
Neil Zip is teaching a mournful dog project.
Rod Gatlin is doing Face on Edge.
And Showcase Chair Keith Jones is teaching the ball in a cage.
It's quite a list.
It is, and if you analyze that curriculum, it's incredibly strategic. It isn't just a random list of projects, it is a ladder of mechanical skills.
Like the sharpening class.
Exactly. Bob Warner's knife sharpening class isn't about making things, it is the absolute foundation of safety and edge geometry.
Because a dull knife requires force, and force leads to slipping.
And slipping leads to injury, yeah. Then Don Ryerson's comfort birds. Those are smooth, highly sanded pieces that teach beginners about grain direction without the pressure of carving intricate details.
Right. What about the Moravian Star?
Rich DeFranco's Moravian Star forces students to learn precise geometric symmetry. And Keith Jones's Ball in a Cage.
Where you carve a loose, rattling ball inside a solid wooden frame without breaking the bars.
Yep, that is the ultimate lesson in spatial awareness and undercutting. By the end of summer, a novice has been exposed to almost every fundamental technique.
It's an Ivy League carving education for the price of a few cups of coffee. But what I absolutely love about this volunteer-driven system is the strict, unapologetic boundary the club sets for its instructors.
Oh, the lunch note.
Yes. Neil McGuire, the editor, includes a specific note about the Tuesday classes. He writes, quote, "If you are late, come when you can. The instructors will stay until the afternoon. Just don't expect them to teach during lunch." It is such a polite but ironclad rule. We will give you our decades of expertise, our patience, and our tools, but do not interrupt our sandwich.
And honestly, setting that boundary is the secret to organizational longevity.
Because of burnout.
Absolutely. Burnout is the enemy of any guild. By fiercely protecting their downtime, these master carvers ensure they actually enjoy coming back week after week.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that sustainable energy is why the newsletter doesn't just look backward at the success of the 2026 showcase. It's entirely focused on forward momentum.
Yeah, they truly don't rest. The Looking Ahead section immediately pivots to an event called Hello Huntersville on May 3rd.
Where Benny Montgomery, Rich DeFranco, Al, and Christy Gaskell will be representing the club.
Right, and they have their Q2 membership meeting locked in for May 19th. And most impressively, they already have the dates secured for the 44th showcase.
Mark your calendars.
Yep. April 9th through the 11th, 2027. And the theme they chose for next year's show is fantastic. Caught in the Act. I can only imagine the kind of kinetic mid-motion physics we are going to see carved out of wood with a prompt like that.
Caught in the Act forces artists out of static, resting poses and demands they understand anatomical tension. It's a brilliant challenge.
It really is.
And, as we conclude our analysis of this newsletter, it brings to mind a broader cultural truth.
What's that?
Well, we live in a society dominated by screens, algorithms, and virtual outputs. A reality perfectly captured by the irony of an AI writing a poem about hand tools.
Right.
Yet the booming success of the Charlotte Woodcarvers proves there is a deep, primal human need to create tactile physical objects.
Definitely.
There's a profound satisfaction in gathering in a real room, smelling the wood shavings, feeling the tension of the grain against a steel blade, and sharing an analog skill with another human being. It grounds us.
It grounds you in the real world.
Exactly. So I leave you with this final thought. In your increasingly automated digital day-to-day routine, what physical analog skill might you be neglecting in your own life?
Go to charlottewoodcarvers.com for charlottewoodcarvers.com/letters for the PDF version of this newsletter and all the past newsletters dating back to 1983.